You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Hello, welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Its purpose is to dissect horror films, both old and new. We're deep down in lockdown at the moment. There's lots of crazy stuff going on outside in the big bad world. What better time to then open up old films, kind of nostalgic senses, evoking those emotions we had of yesteryear, and start streaming some of these films you may not have caught the first time round. You've heard their classics and you've gone, yeah, I'll get to that one. This one is probably a perfect prime example of a movie that you have to see, and you may have heard of it before. It's called Peeping Tom, and we're looking at it today because it's celebrating its 60th anniversary. Yes, 60. Don't run away to the hills just because of that age. I really recommend this one, but we'll get into the nitty-gritty of exactly why I'm sounding so animated in this podcast as we kind of get into the guts of it, as we say, when we start dissecting the film itself. I'm rambling, should introduce myself. My name is Saul Muerte. I'm the host of the podcast series, and I'm joined for the discussions by Miles Davies. Welcome aboard, Miles.
Glad to be aboard.
So I'm ranting, but there's a reason for that, because I have only watched this film. Maybe I could count them on my hand. It's not as much as this film probably deserves, and that's probably something that I want to tap into a little bit as well as we kind of start talking about the film. But before we do that, there's a reason that you were thrust into the frenzy of this discussion for the podcast episode, and that's because you are a big fan of Michael Powell, the director, and I'd like you to just, if you wouldn't mind, just touching on that and why. What is it about Powell that resonates for you so highly as a film director?
You know what's funny? I have a strange relationship with Michael Powell and his old partner, Emmett Pressburger. I grew up in England, so any Sunday afternoon, they would always have one of their movies on BBC Two or on as a Sunday afternoon movie somewhere. So it was always like, I Know Where I'm Going, A Canterbury Tale. I don't even know how many times I've seen A Canterbury Tale. Yeah. And A Matter of Life and Death, which is my absolute all-time favorite movie of all time. And The Red Shoes, of course, and just Tales of Hoffman, Scarlet Pimpernel, 49th Parallel, blah, 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 blah. Carry on.
And it goes on and goes on.
And I was in a bookshop. I was in Gould's bookshop one Saturday, about 20-odd years ago. And I was walking around and I was looking in the film section, and I saw this book, A Life in Movies, by Michael Powell. And it was part one of his autobiography. Yeah. And so there's A Life in Movies, and then there's $1 Million Movie. Yep. Life in Movie, and it's the strangest narrative. It jumps back and forth, but it tells a story about this director. And he starts off by saying, because he started off in the industry very, very early in the industry, like in the 1920s in France, when all the Hollywood movies were all filmed in France, because that's where all the life was. They had greenhouses set up there. And he went over there for some reason. He was over there with his dad or something, ended up with a job working on one of the film sets. And he started talking about the film directors, and he goes, we became artists in an art form that had yet to be made. And I went, fuck, that's good. That just grabbed me from the get-go. And then I was just, I had a background for all of my favorite movies. Yeah. And so I read this book back and forth, and then I got into $1 Million Movie, and then it goes up to Peeping Tom. And you know what? That's where I stopped. And I couldn't get much further than Peeping Tom, because we all know, well, I don't know whether everybody knows, this was the movie that destroyed his career.
Yes, that's right.
And he was at the peak of his game, and was just he was the director of England and almost America. Like, he was friends with Hitchcock. In fact, Hitchcock recommended Kim Hunter to him for Matter of Life and Death.
Okay. Yeah.
He actually started off as a stills photographer for Hitchcock during the quarter studio days, when Hitchcock started off making films in Britain. And so this film just absolutely decimated him because the reviews were just fucking woeful. They just did not understand, because what they had with him before, they had these beautiful artistic films, ballet films, romance, all of these like nice middle of the road films, and then he comes out with this film, the first ever, what's known as the first ever slasher film.
Yeah,
and nobody knew what the fuck they were looking at.
Yeah,
I mean, when you look at it now, you go, "Fuck, it's genius, way ahead of his time."
Yes.
But at the time, it just destroyed him. So you look at his credits afterwards. He came over to Australia. He did a couple of movies. He did They're a Weird Mob, and what's the other one? Was it Kangaroo? Was it the D.H. Lawrence one? No.
No. I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Yeah. But he did like 2 movies over here, and helped set up the government filming finance body.
Yes, yeah.
And then he went back to England and just basically ended up in a 1-bedroom bedsit. And that's where years later, like 10 years later, Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola were looking for him. Yes. Because Scorsese loved him. He loved Red Shoes. Yeah. And he looked for him, and he found him in this bedsit and said, "Mate, get over to here and come to America and work as a consultant for me," like in a sort of made-up role almost.
Yeah,
it's just these 2 young filmmakers, Scorsese and Coppola, and then got a job in a university and ended up marrying. I think Powell was in his probably 50s or 60s at that time, and married the very young 30-year-old Thelma Schoonmaker.
Yeah, that's right.
His editor. And now she runs his all of his films. She does all the restorations.
That's right. Yeah.
Runs his estate, and so he's got an incredible story. I highly recommend reading the books. They're massive reads, but there's so much in there. And
I literally I stumbled across that just literally in the documentaries that I was watching in the research for this. And they were talking about it because it was the people behind the CEO of Lumiere, who basically kind of endorsed that and got that kind of up and running and helped him with those books. And I was just like, I need to read these. I have to read them. And I was trying to jump online to see if I could find any, but I couldn't get any that were a decent price anyway. So, but yeah, it kind of made me. I really want to read that because I was just like, I've got to get my head into that,
They really are, like, his autobiographies are the must-read for any film fan.
Yeah.
Especially, being a Brit. This guy set up the English. He was one of the pioneers in the industry.
Yeah.
And so he will tell, like, he tells you the story of British cinema, how it was set up with the Quarter Days, with Ealing and all of those Pinewood studios.
Yeah.
So he goes through it all, and it's an incredible read.
Yeah.
Any film fan would just be like, just losing their minds. And it's funny. I was reading the first time I ever read the Life on Movies book. I was sitting on a train station, and that's where and this girl sitting next to me on the train platform, and she said, "Hi, I'm Shelley," and I said, "Hi, I'm Miles," and then years later I ended up marrying her.
No way! Oh, yeah. That's cool.
So, she goes, "What are you reading?" And I said, "I'm reading this amazing book." Ranting about this book to her, and she went, "Mate, you ranted at me when you first met me," and I was like, "No, I was so excited about the book."
That's cool. I love it. By the way, just going back to what we were saying, that film we were talking about was The Age of Consent. Norman Lindsay.
Oh, that's it.
Norman Lindsay novel.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So, like, and as an aside, I don't know. I need to get in touch with my mate. He helps write kind of scripts and things, and he got charged with somebody to adapt a couple of Norman Lindsay novels. I wonder how he's going with that. I should really know. Anyway, I'll cut all that out. But that's just reminding me I need to get in touch with him to see how he's going. So what was I saying? But what does that say about the industry, though, to have that kind of a knee-jerk reaction to something like if we put it in a context now, right? Is there an equivalent kind of film director who's come out and made something so life-altering or life-changing that everyone has balked at them and their work. Can you think of something like that that's happened more in recent times? Or are we more forgiving or kind of willing to allow experimentation to come through?
I think there's just different... Critics are always going to be outraged about something.
Yeah.
So these days it's the, it's the Netflix era. So they're pissed off about Netflix making all these quality movies. And they're going, nobody's coming to the cinema anymore. We had the same discussion 40-odd years ago with, what was it, the Jean-Luc Godard film, Chambre 666.
Yeah.
It was like, it's all about, is TV killing the cinema industry? It was like, no. Not both. I mean, the only thing that's killing the cinema industry at the moment is coronavirus.
Yeah.
But people will still go back to the cinema. I love going to see movies on the big screen. So, but yeah, and you know what? This film didn't corrupt people's minds. It didn't, it didn't make people violent. Nobody copycatted it. So I think it was a lot of real stuffy British film reviewers who just suddenly for no reason whatsoever, except that I don't think they got what they were expecting. And that's what happens any time a film reviewer gets pissed off about a film. It's because they didn't get what they were expecting.
Sure.
And I've seen it time and time again. They did it with I remember the first reviews for the Bruce Willis M. Night Shyamalan film Unbreakable.
Yeah.
Were like, this is not what we ordered. This is not what we wanted. We wanted another Sixth Sense. Yeah. This is shit. And then it's like, and then you look at it years later, all the fans are going, fuck, this is one of his best films. In fact, it's probably even better than the Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
Because film reviewers didn't get what they wanted.
No, that's right.
I mean, originally the movie was pulled as well from a cinema.
Yeah. Well, that's right. So that wasn't what I was going to say.
And it was pulled. And then it didn't really receive a resurgence until like 10 years later when people rediscovered it.
Yeah.
And, they just went, this is a fucking work of art.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I mean, that's what's interesting, isn't it? Like, because when you're looking at it now and people talking about it, and as you said, the resurrection of Peeping Tom and when that came about, there were a lot of it sowed enough seeds there with filmmakers, and that it resonated with them, that it was such a strong and powerful movie that I can't remember the dude's name, but that was talking in the documentary I was watching, but he was kind of saying like it was almost one of those holy grail kind of films because it got kind of pulled, and yet it carried on with that word of mouth about it, and people that had seen it who did like it were raving about it still. And obviously Scorsese was one of those people, and we as film fans and horror fans have a lot to praise Scorsese about with the resurrection of this, because he basically kind of upfronted the money for it to kind of get kind of pulled out and financed to kind of get it all ready for. I think it was for the 50th anniversary, wasn't it? It was like 10 years ago when it was.
Yeah, so he did the Criterion release.
Yeah, that's right. So
he's got such a strong relationship with Michael Powell, because he helped him. So they both helped each other, and then he's got a strong relationship with Powell's wife as well. That's his editor. That's it. It's full stop. He never uses anybody else. It's just always Feltner.
Yeah.
And so they've got such a strong tie to Powell that it's nice. It's nice to see the younger sort of recognizing, and I wish more people would get into Powell and Pressburger and the Archers. And I say the Archers because that's their production company. So if you see at the beginning, the logo pops up of the bullseye. Yep. And there's a little joke that they say they always know when they've done a good film because it hits the bullseye. It hits it on. If it lands slightly off, it means they're not of it. But I've never seen it actually land slightly off. We're just always right.
That's cool. I know what I was going to say now. So back to what we were saying. So, like, the whole thing about the misjudgment of Powell, though, is that what's interesting about him as a filmmaker is that he belonged very firmly within the with the French kind of new wave scene that was going on, the cinema verite kind of movement. And they almost continue to embrace him. One of the few kind of areas that continue to embrace him. And what I mean by that was that he was always experimental in what he was doing. But I think more than anything, and yes, this has a different tone to the movies that was presented beforehand, but they all live in a fantasy world.
Absolutely.
Well, there's a fantastical element to them. He's just using a dark fantasy component rather than, light and fluff that we get in a lot of his romantic kind of era. And even
got a similar color scheme as well. Like beautiful use of color.
Yeah.
Matter of Life and Death, they switch between black and white and color, and they mix them both so well together.
Yeah.
And then Red Shoes, you can see. The art direction in this one was the same. The art director in this one was the same one as he usually is, which is Arthur Lawson, who they worked with on the Red Shoes. So it's very, you can see the color scheme is so in tune with. You can look almost directly at the Red Shoes as a precursor to the Peeping Tom.
Yeah.
Even with Moira Shearer in it, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He's brought back Moira Shearer, who's not an actor.
No.
She was originally a dancer.
Yes.
And he hired her for the Red Shoes because when he went to Sadler's Wells ballet company, he said, "I want Margot Fontaine," and they went, "You can't have her." so he went, because she was known as the best ballet dancer in the world at the time.
Yeah.
And an icon in ballet. And they went, "You can have Moira instead." And he went, "Okay, all right." But then, and he used her again for other films. So, he used her for this. And it's a small role. But she only did about 4 or 5 different films.
Yes.
He uses the same people over and over again.
Yeah, yes, he does. That's right. So, you touched upon the palette, and I think that's where I want to go to next. And I know we haven't kind of delved into the plot line yet, but I feel like there's enough kind of themes and stuff that we're talking around at the moment that I want to kind of just let the blood keep flowing for a moment, because that was the thing that struck me about Powell's work previously, not just including this film, is it's just beautifully shot films. And the opening scene of this film, when I watched it, I literally watched it 3 days back now, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I put it on and I literally just went, oh,
I know.
Orgasmic kind of chill, because it's beautiful. That just opening scene of him watching the female prostitute just by the window, and it's just it's just such a rich palette. And I just went, I want to swim in that. That's just And I just was reminded of how good his films were, and we were only a few frames in, and I guess that's why I'm sounding more animated than I normally am on these podcasts. I just was like, I want to go on this journey again, and maybe that's maybe this is a good point actually to kind of start talking about the plot line. But before we do that, I do want to just touch on the first time we watched this movie. I remember I've definitely watched this once before. I remember that it was late on, I was in Australia at the time, and it was, I'd gone to, when I was working in another profession to where I am now. And at my lunch break, I would sneak over to the Australian Film, Television, Radio School because they had one of the best film libraries going. And I would just literally have, admittedly, a little bit of a longer lunch break than necessary. I'd often hand back late anyway, so it's that kind of industry. But and make up for it. But I'd go in there, and that's where I watched it. I was in a very small viewing room in the afters kind of video library essentially, and I watched it. So it probably wasn't the best place to watch it when you're talking about what we were saying palette-wise. But I was fascinated with it, and I was like, why haven't I watched this before? And I think part of me was maybe turned off a little bit. As much as we're talking about the beauty of Powell's films, I kind of felt like I'd gone through a whole series of, when I was in the UK, did a very similar thing of watching it. This time in my uni library, I used to kind of go in there, again, bloody excellent library, and I would watch films in there too. And I went through and watched, the films we mentioned: Red Shoes, Matter of Life and Death, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, The Thief of Baghdad, Black Narcissus. That's a lie. I watched Black Narcissus at the Soho cinema in London on the big screen. So I actually did see that one on the big screen as part of the BFI thing, I think, actually. Anyway, That's on the side. But yeah, I went through all that stuff, and so I hadn't got around to watching Peeping Tom, but I felt like I had gone through that journey, Powell's journey, and I was like quite content with what I'd seen. But yeah, lo and behold, it was still on one of my lists, must watch lists. So I kind of went, I'll watch it, and I remember being really kind of enamored by it. And so I guess that's my journey into it. But what was your memory of first watching this film? How far back are we going?
I didn't come to it until later. Like, it was only when I was reading the book that I went, I haven't actually seen this.
Yeah.
And I went, and that's when I tracked it down, and I managed to, God knows, I think it took me like a year to track it down. And so I finally got a copy, and I think I've got like the Criterion collection or something. I've got the box set of Powell Pressburger.
Oh, nice. Yeah, nice.
So I got it in there, I think, and it might not be in there actually. I think I might have got it as an added extra. But yeah, so that's the first time I watched it. But and it's great. So
yeah, cool.
Being a horror fan anyway, so it was just like it ticked a lot of boxes for me.
Yeah, and it does, and I guess we're talking this is 1960 that it came out, same year that Psycho came out, talking about Alfred Hitchcock kind of connection. Both dealing with kind of voyeurs and encouraging the audience to become the voyeur of the voyeur in the film. This one obviously takes it to the next level, where it deliberately uses the camera gaze for us to kind of see what he is seeing, and it becomes an infatuation with the Mark Lewis character, in that he, to quote Martin Scorsese again, he says, like, this is where art becomes sinister and perverse. And we are encouraged along with that, the journey that cinema has with its audience. It is what it is, basically holding up the mirror to that and exposing it for what it is. And that's exactly what Mark Lewis's character is doing. He has the mirror so he can capture the reaction of his victims. So they're actually seeing themselves as he is, killing them, essentially.
He's watching the horrific look on their faces, essentially.
That's right. And he's constantly searching for that thrill, that fear that is and capturing it on, and he can never get it. That's the irony of it. He can never get what he's looking for. I mean, the interesting thing with this film, with the Mark Lewis character too, is that obviously and this is what comes out in the film, is that there is obviously a trauma background with him, and the way that his dad played pranks on him as a kid and would film it and did really kind of spark these kind of controversial kind of things with him, which scarred him. And he was always searching for that, or trying to fill that void again as an adult. So it gives I guess, credit to the way he behaves. And I think that's something that makes the film that much more believable and likable, in the sense that we relate to his plight. And there's a reason for him doing these things. It's not just like we're not talking about a Jason or Michael Myers thing where it's just killing for the sake of killing. There's actually a psychological reason behind it.
Psychological motive, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Which is kind of interesting in and of itself. So look, there's a lot kind of going on that makes this not just the palette rich, but the subject matter is rich too, and the journey that this character is going through lends weight to the journey he undertakes, and this endless pursuit of satisfaction, to have that climactic thrill, which arguably he gets at the very end, but the end result is a fatality. It's not. And so he basically, he's in the pursuit of something he will never reach, and theoretically doesn't ever reach because it ends in death. So yeah, it's a really fascinating piece. I kind of almost want to dive back in and watch it again as well. And that says a lot with a film when I've only just watched it again for like three nights ago. But okay, so let's just quickly kind of nut through the actual kind of plot, as it were. So I talked about how we see Mark Lewis, played by Carl Boehm. I want to say that's how you pronounce his surname. And that's something. Yeah, that like he's a German actor, right? So this is the other thing that's I guess again lends credibility to the eeriness of his role, because it's set in England, but he's a German, and he speaks English, but his accent's very thick, and he, not just his mannerisms, but because the way he talks is almost alien to that kind of world, then he already comes across as a bit of a fish out of water, a man out of place and not in sync with the world around him. Yeah. And that wasn't a deliberate casting. That wasn't intentional to kind of have him. They had someone else in mind, and I forgot to write it down, but I think it was an American actor. And it just didn't come about. So by chance, Carl Boehm kind of came into the role, and it's a happy coincidence because I can't see anyone else playing that role.
No.
He's a very interesting looking man as well. He's got quite big eyes, which then lends weight to him viewing these people and observing, and from the outside looking in.
The big lens size eyes, they're just always watching, like, just you never know what's going on but behind those eyes. No,
that's right. And his expression often is quite neutral as well. So and even when he's talking quite matter-of-factly, I'm jumping ahead, but when he's talking to the other camera assistant about the reason why he's shooting this stuff, and he's just matter-of-factly kind of saying, I want to preserve these images, and and he's very blunt about it, which is almost quite chilling. So it's an interesting, he's just a fascinating character. So we meet him, as I said, on the streets, and he's filming this prostitute who's kind of standing by this shopfront window. He's filming her with his camera hidden under his coat. So there's this kind of very underhanded, perverse approach that he's having anyway to the scene of filming her without her knowing. And he approaches her. We see it from the point of view within the camera viewfinder. So very almost straight away, we're like from behind the lens and being taken as we're then following her into the flat. And he kind of makes his way in, and then we see her reaction to him obviously changing, but we don't see what she sees. We're just seeing her reaction, and he kills her. So how do you find that as an opening for a film?
It's, these days it's a classic opening. You've got death. It's standard sort of, it's like Scream, isn't it? That's off of a kill, and then it gets into the story. It just sets it up of there's a bad guy on the list, bang, let's get into the rest of the story. I love the fact that we were seeing it through the viewfinder, and then it just cuts to him watching the movie itself. It's quite interesting. So it's you get a different point of view.
And I love that image of him like sitting there, and you've got the projector screen kind of blasting up in it, and he's hand up against the the couch there, and he's just watching.
Which is essentially, it's an early serial killer.
Yeah.
The fact that most serial killers take trophies, and they didn't realize that till years later.
Yeah.
So his trophy is the film.
That's right.
Yeah. So he doesn't take anything else except their last moments, which he can rewatch and rewatch and rewatch.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting. I wonder if the guys at Quantico and Mindhunter or something ever watched this film, because it actually really is laid out on the line. If you want to get the mind of a serial killer, this is it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Actually, yeah. Like what I find that equally fascinating with that though as well is. And I was thinking about that in the lead up to our record, and I'm not really sure how to word it, but the way he becomes more reckless, which I know is quite serial killers often display that. Like it's almost often the case that they want to get caught.
Yeah,
I am jumping ahead, but that whole scene where he's then in the news agency and he's filming the girl, and there's the cop right outside watching the news agents. So it's like, and
even in the studio when he's filming them investigating the Moira Shearer's death, he's like up in the rafters filming away. So it's just like it becomes very cocky.
He does.
And it's really as we were saying, it really is. He is one of cinema's first serial killers, essentially. So, like in the stereotype of serial killer.
Yes, so. That's right. So we so like you say, like we're watching him as he follows that, and as he's viewing the death, but and then he goes out in the streets the next day, and he's filming the place as they have discovered the corpse.
Yeah, that's right.
And he poses as a reporter to kind of get around it. And I love the fact where the guy goes, "What paper are you from?" He said, "The Observer." It's like, I was like, of course he is. Such
a there's a humour in this film as well. Yeah. Even the two cops are kind of a little bit comedic. Is that they remind me of the cops in what's it called, American Wealth in London. And also, what's it, Match Point as well? Woody Allen. A little bit sort of they're good at the job, but they've got a bit of a comedy thing going, Laurel and Hardy-ish kind of thing going on. And so that's it gives you that sort of, it's that balance between horror and humor that just goes well as well.
I guess again, you bring Hitchcock back into the fold. He always said there's a fine line between comedy and horror. And I think you kind of need those beats, lighthearted beats in the middle of it to kind of,
well, that's it. And it's like, I think Hitchcock said it as well. It's like you scare them, and what's the first thing they do after they get scared is they laugh.
Yes.
So,
yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so then we get we find out then that Mark Lewis is a member of a film crew. He's wanting to become a filmmaker, and he also works part-time photoshopping the soft porn kind of flicks, pictures of women essentially that are sold under the counter at a news agency.
What do they call them? Views. If you got views. Yeah. And I was like, what in the fuck?
That's a comedy moment in itself, isn't it? With the old dude who's buying He's a well-known playwright and comedy actor, a character actor. So he's been in films for years, like quite a famous guy. Yeah. And it's funny watching this guy asking for some dirty pictures. And then we get the schoolgirl coming in, and like all of a sudden he's just trying to hide the fact that he's doing what he's doing.
I love the print on the paper as well. It's like educational books. And then he goes, "Oh, and you forgot your paper." He goes, "Oh, yeah, oh, that's right."
Yeah, it's good stuff. So then we get Lewis. Then goes back to his house essentially, but it's a huge house, and he rents it out, all the rooms and stuff out, and he basically lives upstairs. And we meet Helen Stevens, played by Anna Massey, who, again, another Hitchcock connection, was in Frenzy, which would come a couple of years later. And she lives basically downstairs with her mother, who's blind. And she kind of is quite curious about him. And from the get-go, and it sounds like it's her birthday party as well, and all the other people there almost look at him as a bit of a joke, but there's something that she finds quite intriguing about him. And, you know, she tries to kind of invite him along, and he's just like, "Oh, no, that's okay." And he goes upstairs, but she comes up anyway, and then, you know, with a bit of cake and a candle, essentially. And then this is where, but also interestingly off this, it's almost like there's this kind of kinship between the two of them almost straight away, because he is like, he's a very lonely, shy man, but he's desperate to connect to people.
Yeah.
And he shows his darkest secrets to her, not the murder, obviously, but of his childhood straight away to her. And he's vulnerable to her. You know, he's showing her his vulnerability, I should say. And I found that quite interesting and remarkable position to place oneself, to be that vulnerable with somebody, or willing to be that vulnerable with somebody. And like, she's slowly watching this thing unfold as like images of basically his dad, as we mentioned earlier, tormenting him by, you know, shining a light in his face while he's sleeping, throwing a lizard onto his bed, and little things like that, you know. So, and she's just like, "What is going on here?" You know, like, why are you showing me this? It's bizarre. And realizing that he's part of basically his dad's psychological experiments based on fear, you know, and that's what he was doing. He was a doctor, but he was using his son as a guinea pig and deliberately frightening him and filming it to kind of capture that reaction, and then write up these kind of scientific kind of theories on fear, essentially. But the result of that is that, you know, we get Mark Lewis kind of trapped in this kind of psychosis that he can't break out of. But yeah, as I said, so he's showing this stuff to the Helen character, and then, as I said, there's this kind of relatability that's going on between. So lots of stuff in the mix.
And is this the part where he shows this is his girlfriend 6 months? It's been like 2 months.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, he does. I think you're right. Yeah. He's like, you know, this was the replacement. It was only a few months down after the fact, which begs the question, what happened there, you know? And we're never really told. But the dad is very quick to move on, shall we say. So, then we get the kind of next little section. So this is when we're back on the film set. We see Maura Shearer for the first time. She's playing an actress called Vivian in this, who's basically a stand-in character, and he's kind of basically sells the idea that he wants to experiment by doing some filming with her after hours, and so they both kind of sneak in onto the set once it's closed, and we get this really quite laid out scene, don't we, that unfolds here with her as there's a great kind of switching of relationship at one point during this, where he gets her behind the camera as she kind of playfully plays along with it and is filming him for a little bit before he then gets a bit awkward with it and turns the tables very quickly back again and says, "Okay, I'm ready now." And she goes, "Oh, Mr. Director," very serious, blah, 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 and all that stuff. And then it kind of builds, the momentum builds up essentially, and he basically is trying to get her to play out the role of being fearful. And she said, I don't know how I can capture that on camera. And he said, well, let's just imagine that you're being hunted by this. And he pulls out, this is what's, his weapon of choice is this tripod, with the point on the end. So of the camera, I should say, the camera tripod. What did you, apart from obviously the phallic relationship of said instrument, what was your take on that? Does that make sense to you? Is that, just, no pun intended, a deliberate extension of the film camera itself and that voyeuristic thing, that it's logical that would be the weapon? Or is that,
obviously that's the only way he can kill the people, but keep them in focus, is he's got them at a certain length that he knows, because he knows the length of the tripod. And he's a focus puller, essentially.
Yes.
So he's set out that length so that he knows that he can stab that person. Yeah. And he knows he's got them directly. Yeah. Always in focus. Yeah. No matter where he goes. Yeah. So I think it's very deliberate of. Yes. A camera person to do that. So. Yeah. I think it's a phallic thing. I think it's a practical thing as a camera person. So I don't know. If I wanted to film someone as I was killing them, then that's probably the way I'd do
it. Yeah, fair enough. So with that, the other thing I was going to ask you, with obviously the first killing we see is done from the point of view from behind the camera. This is the first time we step outside of that and we're seeing him take that on. And I guess that's the next logical step in the journey of building up the character of who this Mark Lewis character is. And we see him kind of like, basically there's always, throughout the process of it, there's an open chest that's sitting in the set, and he basically kills her and she ends up into the chest. And that's how he doesn't dispose of the body, which I find quite interesting too. He didn't dispose of the last body. He's not about covering up his tracks. He's more about the moment, the death, the kill of itself. So
I think, we're talking about, does he want to get caught? And it's like, I think he really does want to get caught. He always wants to get caught. Yeah. Because he wants to be punished, and he's always been punished throughout his entire life. So he just wants to be stopped. Yeah. Because the experiment, clearly he's an extension of his dad's experiment, and he's of the dad's experiment. Whether his dad meant him to turn into what he turned into is a different question, and it's never really divulged, but you kind of get the impression maybe that's what he was trying to get at. Unless he just turned into the Frankenstein's monster. So.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. He's just the result of his dad's reincarnation of his experimentation, I should say. Yeah. So the next bit we see is kind of linking back to what we were saying about the two cop characters in it, and they have logically put together the fact that there's a relationship between the first murder and this one. And so then their next step is to start interviewing the people on set, including Mark. And interestingly, as we said, Mark is filming everything the whole time. Even when they're interviewing him, he's filming it, and things like that. And he has a very, very cocky kind of approach to what is happening. And like you mentioned, he climbs up in the rafters at one point and he's filming them as they... Oh, no, even on set, sorry, I'm jumping ahead a bit. On set first, before the cops come along, he films the reaction of the actress discovering Maurice Shearer's body. Well, where, he knows it's about to happen. And he's fascinating.
That's obviously why he did it. He knew the girl was going to go to the box. Yeah, so he was waiting for that reaction, and he got the reaction almost like what his dad did.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I find it such a. I keep saying the word fascinating. I need to use another point of my.
It's rich. It's really multi-layered. So
it's so weird, and I guess that's why, I keep talking about, and I said it earlier, but I feel like I want to dive back into it again, and really. And just kind of keep watching it. Really, I find it such a it's his character essentially is what I think makes it so interesting and visceral. And so so he's really pushing the boundaries and things. And then we get like the breakdown of his character a little bit. We see the softer side of him in the next scene where he's then goes out to dinner with Helen, and you know, he wants to film.
He makes him take his camera away. His identity is taken, like his traditional identity is taken away, and suddenly he's become who he actually should be. And so he goes on a date with her as a normal human being rather than the product of his father's shitty experiment.
And he feels happiness, you know, he feels connected, and you know, and then he's suddenly torn because he realizes that he does feel something towards Helen, and that's going to prove difficult for him to kind of break down, allow that the walls that are around him to kind of break down essentially. I want to then, like, so at the end of this day, I want to talk about Helen's mum, who's blind, and her character, because she's the first person that sees Mark for who he is, which is interesting again because she's blind. And it's like she's able to see past that, you know.
It's such an ancient Greek theatre type thing of, you know, she is essentially Tiresias, blind seer of Thebes. She's the one that sees who he is. And it's the thing with all Greek plays, to explain it to the audience, to anybody who hasn't read any Greek theatre, is there's always a character called Tiresias, and it might change different names in other plays, but there's a blind seer, and they're always like the person that can prophesize what's actually going to happen next. And so she's essentially that particular character in the tragedy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And thank you for a highbrow statement on that. It just raises the profile.
I'm all fucking highbrow.
But no, I love that though. I mean, you know, I'm a thespian through and through, so I have a massive theatre background, and the Greek theatre is where drama was born. You know, so or at least the performance of drama was born. So I like that connection. So Mrs. Stevens is waiting for him inside his flat though. I'm back, and there's this great interaction between the two of them, and she's just basically like, you need to leave my daughter alone. You need to promise me you won't do anything. And he's like, I won't, not her. I couldn't, you know. So he's already realizing that he couldn't do those horrible things. He's aware that he does horrible things. And he could never enact that on somebody to him who is that precious. So, but she's basically just kind of warning him off, essentially saying, like, you need to leave her alone. And like he's watching the snuff film of the murder of Moira's character. Is that one, or is it? Or is it a different one? Anyway, he's watching the murder anyway. Yeah. Oh, there's that great bit where he goes downstairs with her too, and she feels his face, and he says, you know,
I see you.
I see you. Yeah. There's a psychiatrist that's called out to console Diane, the Diane character, who is the actress that discovered the dead body of Moira's character. Sorry, I know I never mentioned her by name. So there's a psychiatrist that comes out, and he's there trying to help her through the process. And then it's at this point that he has a conversation with Mark, and he's like, and he realizes that who Mark is and who he obviously worked with his dad. In the same profession. And he says to the policeman after they've had that kind of conversation, he goes, he's got his father's eyes. All too telling, that statement. And at this point, the police are like, yeah, there's something a bit sus about this odd Mark character. So they decide to get a policeman to tell him. And then that's where the policeman turns up with the newsagents, where Mark does his photographs of the pinup girls. And this is where he meets up with Millie, the blonde girl that we saw in an earlier scene. And she's played by Pamela Green. And again, I mentioned her purely for the fact that she crops up in a little role in Legend of the Werewolf, a classic film. And so he is there to kind of photograph her in these kind of like risque kind of photo shoots that we kind of mentioned earlier. And this, there was actually two versions apparently of this film shot. There's a more risque version, which is the one that I think I saw in the recent version. Basically, there's a shot where it's a reverse shot of her, and we actually see her breasts exposed.
Oh, right.
In the and it was credited as being the first female nude scene in a major British feature at the time. But it's like literally only for a few seconds. It's not like it's not even that long, but still stands the test of time for that statement alone. Yeah. And then like later, Mark basically emerges, hops on his little Vespa, and then and heads off into the busy streets of London, having killed Millie, but we're not aware of that at this point in time. And then but the policeman that's tailing him does phone up the lead detective and say, like, I don't know what's going on here. He's just hanging out at this newsagent's. I don't really think there's much to it. And then we join Mark as he's come home, and he's obviously filmed the death of the girl, and he's left his films all set up in his house. And this is where Helen comes in. We're coming back to the days where you just leave your front doors open clearly and let your neighbours just kind of go through your household. And she kind of manages to get this kind of projector up and running. And this is when she realises what he's done, as we're seeing the murders unfold. And we're not aware at this point as she's watching it, but Mark is just standing in the shadows watching her discover his secret. So really he's kind of happy. He's almost not happy. He's kind of almost willing to be discovered at this point. So then he comes out the shadows, as I said, and he starts kind of talking to her and saying, like, you need to leave now. You'll be okay if I don't see you afraid. But she's kind of keeps pursuing him as like, well, that's not real. What I saw on there isn't real, is it? That you didn't actually do that. So she's denying what she's seeing, even though the evidence is there, she's just unwilling to kind of admit to the fact that he has done these things. And this is where he kind of, there's a point where he has the camera on her and he's talking through what he would do, and he's filming her, and he's got the tripod out and he's explaining it, and there's that beautiful shot of the really kind of magnified view of her frightened face through the lens. And she's trying to close her eyes and turn away, and he's trying to evoke that fear out of her, but he wants to, but he's also doesn't want to. He's kind of on this tightrope of not knowing what to do, because he genuinely has these feelings for her. And that's when he then kind of mounts the camera onto the wall, and he has this kind of stuff, all these other cameras rigged up, and essentially because the police are turning up, and the reason they turn it up, sorry, I jumped ahead slightly, is because the body of the girl at the newsagents is discovered. They call up the detective who's doing the case because it's a similar death. And that's when he puts two and two together and says, wait, hold on, newsagents. And he realizes that Mark's the guy that's behind it. So they turn up at Mark's house. and he realizes that there is no way out. So he rigs up he's got these cameras rigged up to film his own death, essentially, as he there's this moment where he says to Helen, "You're here to witness this. I need you to witness this." And she's trying to plead with him not to. And he points the tripod towards himself as it's mounted up, and he has the cameras rigged up. So as he runs to the tripod, it takes photos of him. And Thelma actually spoke about this particular moment, because she said this is a talking point of film, the art of film itself, capturing it, because he's capturing every frame of his moment up. That's what he's leaving behind as his death scene. He's going to capture every scene leading up to it. And as he gets to the tripod, he freezes, and he kind of says this moment of like, I'm afraid and I'm happy, or something like that. That's not the exact quote. And before he plunges the tripod into his throat, there is something a bit.
I mean, it's still like, I mean, it's 1960.
Yeah,
but still like, such a shocking moment.
Yeah,
still
we don't like. It's not shocking as in gore. Shocking because it's not no real blood seen apart from the trickle of blood coming out of his mouth when he's laying motionless on the floor.
But it's real horror.
Yeah, but it's it's that kind of moment of like, oh my god, he's actually gonna, because the very thought of, there's almost like that, what's the Japanese symbolic kind of I've forgotten the terminology where one commits suicide and it's a sign of
harikari.
Yeah, thank you. God, mind blank. There's almost that moment, that it's alluding to. And he has no way out. And he realizes that the only way that he can stop this fantasy, because he can't stop it, no one can stop him. He's being blatant about the way he's doing things, is to do the deed himself and capture his last moments. What I actually loved about this last scene,
like a setup anyway. So it just, he had it ready to go. Like
he did. He
like he knew that's what ready to go. So, and he knew that was the eventual. That was the ending. That was the Act 3 of his life. Basically,
that's right. That's right.
That was always going to happen. So.
Well, and that's the thing, because he is essentially making a documentary. That's what he's doing the whole way through it. It's just a documentary of his own insights and fascinations and morbid fantasies. Yeah. And that is the logical end of his documentary. Like you said, he always knew how it was going to end, and it would end that way. But there's this great moment that I love at the end of it, which is. And it's been done since, but as he lies there, like Helen kind of is crying over him, but she kind of almost faints. But there's this moment where their hands just touch on the floor, and it reminds me, it's a completely different movie, massively different movie. But John Woo's The Killer movie, where they're both blinded, the male and the female are blinded, and they're trying to reach out and hold each other's hands, but they just keep missing each other. But it's this moment of connection, and in this case they do connect, because they are the romance in Michael Powell is still there, that romantic side of him, and this kind of moment where they have to connect at the end. And I just love that moment. It's a very, very simple thing.
It's a tragic love story, isn't it? You can't have a tragedy about love.
Exactly. And that's where we end the movie, man. That's how it ends. Yeah. So, we have the police kind of bursting into the room, and they kind of discovered the star-crossed lovers on the floor, and that's the end. So we've gone through that motion. We ourselves are romanticizing the film, and for good reason. We've both only watched it a handful of times. Sorry.
We forgot to mention in the home movies of his dad, portrait. The dad is actually the director, Michael Powell. Mm-hmm. So if you ever want to know what Michael Powell looks like, that's what he looks like.
Not only
tall, bald guy with a moustache.
Yeah, that's right. Not only that, but the boy is actually his son.
Yes,
as well. Columba Powell He's the guy, and often like people kind of asked, didn't that traumatize you? And he was like he's an older guy. It was an older guy in the interview, but he just said, no, it's just a movie. It's not. But they often thought like that was quite a traumatic thing because it was just filmed in the house. So there was this kind of like, again, it's just that, just again, that very thing adds the weight to this kind of, it's almost a love song to film, it's like, and I think that's why I've said this before. Yes, this is a podcast about horror films, and that's essentially our bread and butter of what we do, but I'm a cinephile through and through. I don't just stop at horror. I love the art of film, and I will happily kind of go through and watch any genre. And I'm redoing that now, as Miles is aware. I've kind of put it out there. I want to watch some films from back from when I was born up to present day, and maybe catch some of the ones I missed. And that doesn't necessarily include horror. But yeah, so I guess that maybe helps us come a bit full circle with this, because we've both only watched this movie a couple of times, and yet we are still kind of, you can tell by how animated we are of how much this film still impacts us. And do you think that that's because we've only watched it a couple of times, or do you think it's because of the merit of how strong this film is?
I actually do believe it's because of the merit of how strong it is. I mean, I've only watched it a couple of times because I've enjoyed savoring it, and I don't want to watch it too much, just in case it just loses its power.
Yeah,
we're talking about the fact that you're genre diverse. Essentially, this was like this wasn't a horror, and what we study with surgeons of horror is that we do a lot of masters of horror, these guys who've made careers in horror films. Michael Palin did that. This is probably his only time he did horror. I mean, he did fantasy type stuff with Red Shoes. There's horror elements and sort of fantasy horror sort of themes, supernatural themes. But I think it took a non-horror director to make the first great slasher film, essentially. This film came out it came out a few months before Psycho.
It did,
so it made it exactly the same time. So the two of them, clearly, Michael Palin and Hitchcock anyway had a very good relationship. And they were probably both, conversing about what they were up to. But it's very, it's very similarly themed, but they're just both kind of very different masterpieces of horror in a way. You've got both of them coming from different cinematic journeys of their lives, and they've got this pinnacle where they've made like the perfect horror films. And one's filled with color and sexual repression and very British, and the other one is filled with it's black and white, and it's by the nut, like it's so like scary American, like the subversive American stuff, all the stuff that lies below the surface of America. And so it's such a, even though they both came out in the same year, they're very sort of, and they both involve males who kill women. They very sort of different journeys, essentially.
They are. It'll be a good companion piece, and I'm to watch the two of them as a bit of a double feature, I think. But that's probably for my own kind of kicks. We are going to be looking at Psycho in our next season podcast as well, just to kind of jump ahead, because that equally is celebrating 60 years this year. So it's good to kind of have a little bit of chat about Norman Bates and that stuff. But do you think, this is a good kind of, maybe a good reason to kind of talk about Psycho, because a lot of people are more familiar with Psycho, and it has quite rightfully kind of been put up on that mantle. Do you think Peeping Tom should deserve to be kind of up on that mantle with it? Does it deserve more recognition, do you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's on par. It really is on par with Psycho as being one of the best horror films ever made, basically.
Yeah.
It's one of these, it's one of these films that you start the journey with and it just doesn't stop. And you just are really on this horror roller coaster ride of intenseness. And this, I mean, as we've been sort of dissecting, it's just been like so many layers to it that you just kind of read more and more into it. You can see more. It's so rich as well.
Yeah.
And just like Psycho is like, it's incredibly rich. Like you don't, but I mean, the thing about Psycho is that you don't really find out
what's happening until about halfway.
Till the end.
Yeah.
And so, but this one, you get that, all the setup, drip fed to you as you're going along until the final moment of like, this is the end, and this is how it must end. How is his film should end, and it's just so sad that Psycho, both of these two directors went on this journey, and one was completely elevated into the next level, and the other one was completely destroyed.
Yeah.
The two films are so good and equally as good as each other.
Yeah.
But it's just an absolute tragedy that one was, treated so badly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. It's fascinating.
Tragedy of the film.
Yeah, that's right.
I think if that hadn't happened, you'd probably be looking at. I think you talk to the average Joe, and they say, "Oh, have you seen Psycho?" "Oh, no, but I know what it is."
Yeah.
You talk to the average Joe about Peeping Tom, and they're like, "I have never heard of that film."
Yes, that's right. That's right. And I guess that's what I was meaning. Like, I find it interesting that it should be talked about as like it feels like it's still only trapped within the confines of film fan or like film fanatics or people that have studied film, I should say.
Yeah,
but it's a bit trapped in Wankerville for wanting to use a better word, because people that study movies will rant and rave about it, and we are doing that too. We're having a big wank fest over it right now, right? So, but like but how do we get outside of that? How does it get promoted to the wider circle? I mean, like I always tend to end, as you know, on asking, would you recommend this to a modern cinema going audience? My answer is definitely 100%, and I'm guessing you would as well. But it feels like it's still trapped within that confine. It's 60 years old now. 50 years ago it got kind of revamped, as we said, with Scorsese pushing it out there, but it still feels like it's stuck, and I don't know how you get it out of that. Is it getting too old now to break down that wall?
I don't know. I think it's still equally as shocking.
Yeah.
And I think it really is, though. You're saying about the wank fest and film fans. I think it's studied a lot by filmmakers.
Yes,
because it's a very, very perfect film. It's beautiful. It's craftsman throughout. The editing is amazing.
Yeah,
cinematography is amazing. The art design is amazing. The script is so layered. Like, I mean, it was written by a guy who was a cryptographer during the Second World War.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Leo Marx, and so it's got, and all the actors are so good in it, and it's just everything just ticks boxes of yes.
Yeah,
and it's just, and all it took was a bunch of fucking wanker films to
just go and bury it. Yeah, it's a shame.
And that's just. I mean, unfortunately, that's just the way it goes sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just only takes like just a couple of guys just to completely destroy a career.
I know, and that's right, and that's like you say. That's why it's sacrilegious, really, that it's kind of come to that. And I'm finding that yes, it caught me when I first watched it, and it's still stuck with me since then. And upon repeat viewing, and you can tell, like, it's still very young in the sense that of me watching it, as I said a few days ago. But the fact that I'm still sounding as animated a few days after the fact, I think says a lot about how much it means to me as a film. And I do want to go back there, but yeah, I get what you're saying about maybe giving it a bit of breathing space before I do that. But yeah, I just maybe we'll just end on that note of just kind of saying, like, if it is one of those movies, as I said, like, you know, I came at it at a very late stage, and if it has been put on the back burner and you've heard about this film called Peeping Tom, and I've been a bit unwilling to go there or keep putting it back on the shelf or whatever way that you've kind of come across it and haven't gotten around to watching it, now's the time to do it. You know, like, if you've got a little bit of spare time, it's only just over an hour and a half long. You know, it's not a long feature. And
as we say, it doesn't stop. It's like it got starts, and it's got horror, it's got comedy, it's got, like, you know, it really is. You do not notice the time go. You like suddenly at the end. I mean, we were just talking about the plot itself, and it was just even the plot itself. You're just talking about it going, and then suddenly it's ended. We've had discussions where we've had the bare minimal plot, and even after like half an hour, you just go, "Fuck me, how long has this podcast gone for?"
I know.
Whereas, you know, we're probably talking about it for an hour, and it's just like bang, bang, bang. There's so much going on. You will not be disappointed.
That's not. I don't often quote movie reviewing websites, but Rotten Tomatoes still has it at 96%.
Oh wow!
And it's Tomatometer that they do. The audience score is at 85%. That's still pretty freaking high. It just kind of goes to show that it does click. It does resonate with its audience still. And I think our consensus here with the Surgeons of Horror team is that it does. You should go and watch this. If you're a fan of horror films, and if you're a fan of slasher and that kind of early voyeuristic kind of camera POV stuff, you might argue that that's been done to death. But if you want to see the genesis of where that began, you got to do yourself a favor and check that out. Cool. And I think on that note, we will end the podcast. But thank you, as always, for listening and tuning into these sessions as we dissect the horror films that we love, both old and new. We hope you're staying safe and keeping the social distancing going, and keeping yourself kind of within your house as much as possible, and looking after yourself and your family. And we will ride through this together, and we will kind of continue to discuss more horror films down the track. Until then, I'm your host, as always, Saul Muerte, and I'd like to extend my thanks to my co-host again for this podcast, Miles Davies.
Thanks. See ya.
Goodbye.
Bye.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com. or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.